Mark, you want to get started, just give a little introduction about yourself and where you're working, and we can just have an intro for the room, and then I'll get into the questions.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Mark Gallagher. I am the brand ambassador and sommelier for Vignobles Sullivan. I'm the head bartender at the Talbot Hotel here in Chicago, and I'm also a food and wine writer.
I'm Scott Barber. I run my company is Green Pin Wines. What I do is I support and develop small brands to reach the market nationwide. I also do some consulting on wine programs and wineries and whatever needs to be done, basically. So I travel around the country and try to help and build small brands in the market.
And I must add that unfortunately, due to that MS exam, but you did pass your MS, so congratulations from us. For sure you were in the hearts of us. You are a master sommelier, so thanks for joining in. Allison, over to you.
I am Allison Corradolo. I am a wine director in Las Vegas. I work with Lettuce Entertainio, and so I'm the wine director at RPM Italian Las Vegas, and then I am involved with some of Lettuce Entertainio's smaller brands as well, smaller wine programs, but great brands. We just recently, last night, opened our newest restaurant, Summer House, Santa Monica in Las Vegas.
Nice. What a name.
Yeah.
Morgan.
Hey, everybody. My name is Morgan Harris. I'm based at San Francisco for the last 5 years, but I spent the first 10 years of my career in New York. And for the last decade or so, I've run very large restaurant beverage programs, sort of, 1,500 to 3,000 reference lists in Michelin-starred environments, so kind of the more upper crust of fine dining. I also do a fair amount of consulting work across the spectrum, everything from sort of small pizzeria lists to sushi bars, and so on and so forth. I just opened the Line Hotel in San Francisco, so I kind of wear a lot of hats. And I also do beverage writing and all that stuff. Like Mark, I wrote offer copy for Wine Access for close to 2 years, and all that good stuff. So yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but most of my experience is in Michelin-starred fine dining, large beverage programs.
Armoni?
But hi, my name is Armani. I'm from Chicago, been working in fine dining and steakhouses in Chicago for pretty much the past 15 years, but I recently had a change. I moved to Santa Barbara County and helped open Auberge Restaurants as the floor sommelier there. But actually now I'm doing a sustainability and MBA program, and I'm in France. So it's 5 p.m. here, and I'm working to kind of build those relationships between sustainability and create more economic business models that connect front of the house and also distribution.
So I've just got a question on that for you later. Alex,
Okay.
How are you? Good to see you in Chicago at Wine Rival, so hope things are well.
Hey, good to see you, Sid. Yeah, things are all right. Name's Alexander Powell. I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. Currently manage the Grand Award Wine Program at Grill 23 Steakhouse and Bar. Originally from Toronto, where I spent over a decade in a variety of restaurants, Michelin-level environments as well, a variety of cuisines, running their programs.
Appreciate it, guys. So I think because we have we have less time. I mean, we want to make sure that not every question is answered by everyone. So I've sort of tailored a little bit here, and then we can if you have an urging desire or something different that you want to add, for sure speak up as well, and keep just unmute yourself and add to the convo. So I'll start my question. Let's start with Alex. The question that I want to ask you is, what do you look for in a new brand when making a buying decision for a menu placement versus by the glass? And this is a sort of a general question that most of you can answer. So now I want to start basically on how do you make a buying decision? What sort of checklist do you have, and what do you look for? Again, by the glass versus the menu.
Yeah, so I mean, for either category, quality to price ratio is really kind of the number one thing. I look to see what really delivers on the palate versus what's being paid for, and what's acceptable in that category of wine. $40 is great for a Chateau Pop, but it's terrible for a Pinot Grigio. There's a buy the bottle checklist. So that's number one. Then it depends on the environment that I'm in. You know, in a steakhouse, kind of anything goes. We don't really pay attention to food and wine pairing. Most people ask me what's going to go with a ribeye or fillet. So it really don't matter. Quality of the price is definitely king, and standing out in one's category are number one. But when we get into kind of Michelin level restaurants that are really heavy on the food and wine experience, then we start really getting into a wine's capacity to pair with food and also deliver on the palate when it comes to price. And, you know, for me, the three tenets of food and wine pairing is, you know, less new oak, higher acid, and lower alcohol. And that kind of rings through with every wine to make them better at the table. You know, for a by the glass offering or the potential pairing menu offering, of course, volume has to be available as well, and the price really has to make sense. And whatever the wine can do to stand out and be unique. Organic and biodynamic is definitely kind of the movement of the future. These things certainly do help to sell wine. They certainly do help to enthuse guests as well. It's not a requirement, no, but it definitely is an asset to start moving towards with your brands. In terms of the distributor, whether it's big or small, you know, the big distributors will often get more placement because they're going to have allocations that we want. That is just a fact of life. But a smaller distributor can also have a lot of pull with your brand as well. You really need to have the distributor, the agent really coming to me. You know, I don't buy 100% of the wines that I don't see. So having someone that's really in your corner, bringing them in, really targeting the restaurant program, the cuisine, is certainly going to help get your wine in there a lot sooner. And one other thing I think is becoming more and more important today, you know, food and wine pairing used to be pretty archaic. You know, have your red wine with, you know, steak or cheese, have your white wine with shellfish. That's all sort of changing. There's a lot more literature on food and wine pairing right now. I think there's a lot more of a focus towards this through sommeliers, and I think there's a lot more of a focus towards it through the general populace as well, trying to figure out what actually makes a good food and wine pairing. And the thing about your wines and your brand is that you should know them better than anybody else. You definitely drink more of them than anybody else. So figuring out what really works, you know, don't just cop out and say, hey, my red wine goes with meat. Come on. You know, figure out what dishes really work, figure out what ingredients really work, and have that be kind of accessible knowledge, not just through your sales rep, but if you could also have it kind of on your website as well. I think that's great for the normal populace. It's definitely great for the sommelier too, to kind of know where that wine does pair with their cuisine, because it's starting to change, yes, but most sommeliers, I think, and chefs still don't really work together. Most sommeliers don't know a whole lot about food and wine pairing. So I think use your leverage as it being your product to really help them out and paint a holistic picture of where your wine really works with certain cuisines or certain cheeses. And I think that will go a long way to convincing the sommelier or the director to take your wine on their program if they have similar food.
Alison, what do you look for, you know, in a new brand?
I think that, excuse me, I think that answer is twofold. It depends on the scope of the program that you're looking for. I recently, we participated in building quite a few national programs. And national programs having awareness from a supplier perspective of where your wines are in the country and who currently supports, I was surprised by how difficult that through line was. And so from national accounts all the way through to delivering to the restaurant on multiple different state levels, being able to speak to product, inventory, timelines, and that requires a lot of work, but just an awareness of the logistics of where wine is, how wine can get there, it's noticeable.
Just to add the context here, you know, we're talking about where, you know, a company like yourself, where it's a regional chain or a national chain, you know, you want pickup locations of each state, you want distributors of each state, you want the line pricing of each state, you want the logistical info when you're talking to a national or a regional buyer, right?
Absolutely. And being able to get that information without necessarily having 7 different people to talk to that aren't talking to each other. I think companies that really can communicate excellently on their back end, that streamlines that buying process, completely separate from the product of the wine, just having the infrastructure there to get things done quicker makes a huge difference to actually getting placements.
Just one question on that. Let's say, 5 of the wholesalers, maybe Southern wines you're dealing with, and obviously they're approved in your restaurant. But then in other 5 states, this brand has a small wholesaler and they're not a approved vendor yet in your chain, or you don't do business with them. How much of that is a friction, or you say forget about it, or you make an effort to sort of make them a vendor as well? Like, what's the real case there?
Right. From our perspective, we will make the effort to get the best wine in no matter what. Even if it's just with one distributor that we're taking one product with. Of course, that gets difficult when it comes to execution as far as delivery and making delivery minimums on the back end. But that's down the line. As far as if we are excited about a product and getting it in, we'll make the effort to go from a variety of different distributors. From the supply side, it ends up being easier when we're talking to fewer people and making more decisions with certain importers, certain suppliers, regardless of how many different distributors we're going to have to go through on the state side.
I'll ask one more question to you, because we are on this chain or regional chain. How much of data selling or data proofing one has to do? Because I'm assuming that it's more on the data you have to buy as well. Like, this category is growing, or you have to have a proof of concept, right? So what kind of data points that you look for when big brands are pitching to you, or when brands are pitching to you, like the category growth or the consumer growth, or show us some 5 or 6 data points that you would look for.
Sure. So we'll go into our personal sales, especially not necessarily for new concepts that are just opening, but for previous concepts in different markets. What sells the best? What has a larger percentage of sales in Chicago versus in Las Vegas, let's say in a spark or rosé category. And so building out those different rosés, we look to previous sales as far as what we are going to spend more effort on. I'd say in, not that I can speak super eloquently about the spirits realm, but looking at products that are on the rise, Cristalinos of that sort. If we're going to invest in a newer category, we'll look at the discourse around what's coming out and what's being talked about, and excited for that process or for bringing on new products.
Let's move on to Morgan. Morgan, I want to add a little twist here. So pitching to a fine wine restaurant, like you've always been, your strength has been, the Michelin stars of the world, the fine wine, and you yourself are master sommelier. So when a supplier is pitching you, obviously, you don't want, I'm just assuming that you don't want so much of knowledge-based selling, because you have the knowledge. So I would rather focus on what, you want me to show you the profit story, the business. What can be a pitch when I'm actually pitching to a master sommelier?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, your product still has to have substance, right? And there's a lot of bullshit in the wine world. And I am not interested in that personally, right? So you have to think that, especially in the Michelin starred space, I think about the wines that I place in the same way that the kitchen thinks about their ingredients, right? So when they buy really fancy white truffles, or beautifully marbled like A5 Miyazaki Wagyu, or they wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the green market, right? Like, I see all that work every day, and I would like the decisions that I make to reflect the work that they're doing. So you may have a great, industrially farmed, branded up the wazoo thing, but it's just not for me, right? It's for someone, it's maybe for supermarkets, but it's just not for my space. And the problem is, a lot of the times those brand managers have the most money and the most time to throw at me. And you have to recognize that if your product has no bona fides around organics, around any sort of sustainability program, around any sort of anything on the product side, you literally just bought Cabernet from somewhere in Napa and threw it in a barrel and then wrapped it up in a marketing package. I just don't care. I really don't. And it's going to be a very difficult time for you to get me to care. So if you want to pitch me, you need to start with product, because it has to have the same integrity that everything does on the culinary side. And I'm not saying that those wines are necessarily bad for everywhere, but they're bad for my space, because I need to be able to look at my guests in the eye and say, hey, just as special as all the food that you had tonight are the wines that you're going to have. So there has to be a narrative, there has to be good farming, hopefully, and there has to be real integrity in the product. And there's a lot of talk that happens around that. Oh, we're sustainable, right? And I was okay. What does that mean? Right? There's a lot of flirting around that happens by brands. But if you just did the work in the first place, then it wouldn't be a problem. So we're going to. That's why you've come to our restaurant. We're not going to co-brand with you by placing you on our wine list if there's no integrity in the product from a production side. So at least for me, and I think probably a lot of buyers in the Michelin starred space, it starts with a decision about the product and how the product is made. And if you don't have those bona fides, then you're kind of barking up the wrong tree, I think.
How much of price is an important thing here when you're pitching a fine dine restaurants or like Michelin star?
We like margin just as much as anybody else. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
But ironically, I think that's another point is understanding where your brand sits relative to other things. Napa Cab, just again, we're going to go as a category, has become an incredibly crowded place for very expensive wines. So for us, more useful is like the really well-farmed $50 bottle in some ways, because we have guests who still expect to have that wine on our wine list. I can buy $300 bottles of Napa Valley Cabernet until I'm blue in the face. Right. That's not a problem these days. But understanding that, even though you're on the bottom side of the market, that may be better for us if you have the right sort of set of bona fides. So price certainly comes into mind and value comes into mind. But that's more like, how does it fit relative to the category that you're working in? I joke with some Pinot Noir producers that it's, I need a more expensive California Pinot Noir because you get to Marcus and the kind of the steps off the cliff. I have no $900 bottle of domestic Pinot Noir to sell someone. So like that could exist. But for us, it's mostly about like price discrimination. How do we add value to checks? How do we generate margin so that we can pour other stuff? In a high-end restaurant space, there's a lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul that happens, and that things don't go on at a straight markup. So, you pour rosé because it's really great with this course, but that's going to make you enough margin to pour fancy red wine with steak, and it's not really like even across the board. So we'll always have our passion project wines next to battle axes. I just keep making Sansoms more expensive, and it doesn't decrease in sales. So to me, that's kind of a win-win, even though I haven't really changed the price point I bought the wine at. But in a nutshell, price is important to some degree, but it can sometimes go here and there in funny ways.
You guys can add the same question, but I'll change a little narrative here. Armoni. On the sustainability, I've looked at your profile. You're studying pretty much this, and also about food waste and other things, right? How can suppliers add that in their pitch? Like, how can they lead the conversation? Like, as Alison said, what are you looking for in sustainability? Precisely, or what are you looking for in helping you with food waste, or any other ways brands can help restaurants become more sustainable? Can be an angle as well. So throw us some approaches that they can do over here. And also, I want to add one more question, and then that same will go for Mark and Scott. How can brands look at the restaurant and find the gap? Like for distribution, it's very easy. We go there and we can see their portfolio, and I see, okay, there is a gap of Napa Cab in this distributor, so I can pitch that. How do you see a gap in a restaurant that I know that, okay, this is my restaurant, I think I have a high chance of conversion?
I've been kind of spoiled in the wine list, being able to have the budget and as well as be able to put some of my passion projects forward. So the first thing that's like always an issue is I have a lot of suppliers reaching me out with so many cool things to put on the list, but when they get there, it's always like what they bring me. Have you read the wine list? I mean, just to get started. And those gaps can easily be filled because I'm like, if you had kind of went over a little bit what we were missing, we're lacking Syrahs here, we're lacking a little bit of Central Coast here, we're lacking a little bit of Burgundy, that can like alleviate 70% of the legwork that we're doing, first of all. Secondly, the sustainability part, right? This is a blanket term. So just like how I feel, well, I hope that in the future we'll start having a real definition to what natural wine is,
Hmm.
where, everybody just has their own kind of definition. It just means that maybe you have low intervention, or maybe it's lower alcohol, or they kind of just let the grapes do the work in the bottle.
So,
But at the same
what?
time, people are not paying for those.
Sorry, just to interrupt there. I want to define sustainability. You know, in our sector, like when it comes to wine, right? So, someone just told me this. I love the definition, which is closer to the source and lighter the bottle, it's more sustainable. It was so simple to understand that thing, you know?
So it's just so broad to say that word. So it's important right now in these next few years, especially with the different things that are happening with the earth and global warming and everything else, to start to define those terms, because it doesn't really mean anything. So there are
But doesn't
people
that
who
mean
are
that brands that are
buying.
near your restaurant will be more sustainable, obviously, and they will have a higher chance eventually if people are going towards sustainable?
Definitely. Well, they're doing it anyway. So that's what's interesting. They're noticing that it's going to sell more. It's going to appeal to guests more, that they are using these practices. They are in Central Coast. All of the winemakers there are kind of changing the way that they were pre-making wine in previous decades, to being more organic and more sustainable. Although they're not buying these certifications, they're still going towards this action of just a lot less intervention in the grapes, and just kind of understanding. Central Coast is very interesting because it is creating these, there's 40 different microclimates there, where they can produce many grapes that come from all over the world and mimic these styles of European, that can keep the alcohol low enough and the acidity high enough. So it's really interesting to see that all the winemakers they're doing it anyway. They are kind of like letting the wine, when you get to be around people like Raj Par, and like get to taste Domaine de la Côte and understand how he is producing these wines in this really cool area. And then 5 minutes away, you'll go down to Tom Stokeman, and they're producing Syrahs that are mimicking this Rhone wind tunnel. You can see how the earth really affects. You have to be there to understand how, in 5 minutes worth of time, that the climate's completely changed. And it'll do you a disservice to intervene with the wines, to be honest.
So if you, to wrap it up on the subject, if you had to train a wine brand's sales rep and you had a
Mm-hmm.
sustainable wine brand and you had to make an elevator pitch, how would you pitch your story of sustainability in, let's say, 30 seconds to a sommelier?
Well, first of all, I would start by actually knowing what was going on with their wine list, how I would fill those gaps, understanding how their relationships between the chef and what is their personal story. And then I would get my varietals that kind of represent something that they are doing on their list. And I know that they can be filled in. They have a lot of Cabernets, they have a lot of steak drinkers. You have these staples that people are going to buy. So when you have those little sweet spots that you can put in your project, I always like to say, what grows together goes together. I would do stories of things that are sustainable or local food products, and pair that with some wines that actually represent the area as a whole. If I'm in Central Coast, I want to do some things, and they're doing some really cool things with like Mencia and red wines that are lighter bodied and have enough acidity, but a little bit of like that bouquet that you can pair with a lot of fish and fresh seafood items that you're getting from the Santa Barbara channel, or make paellas. And I would go with that. I would go with the food story first.
Cool. Mark, will come there. Let me ask this to Scott. Scott, you've been on the other side as well. You've been in the distribution business, you've sold wine, you've knocked doors, and you've been on the other side, like of the restaurant side. So you've seen both sides of the world very nicely, right? So let's wear the salesman's hat. What would be a good sales material you want to prepare when you're planning your restaurant pitching strategy? What kind of decks do you need? What kind of point of sale do you want to keep it ready? Like sales ready. What do you call a sales ready?
It's a little controversial, but I don't really use any of that stuff. To me, it's about that connection with the buyer, doing your homework, like she said, seeing the mind behind the list and trying to find maybe some wines that mean something to them that resonate with you, and you can connect with them over some of their pet wines and say, hey, you like the Loire Valley Reds too. I like this. We connect on this way, and so you're probably going to like this what I have. And to me, it's about triangulating and sitting on the same side of the table as the buyer instead of sitting across the table, because you're working together to find them the right wines for their programs and for their guests. So to me, tech sheets and things like that, I can always follow up with that if they care. But barrel regimes and total acidity in the wine and that kind of detail, I don't think people really care about that as much as they care about the story behind the wine, who's making the wine, where does it come from, the specific details that she was just referring to about this vineyard and what makes it special and what makes it different and what makes it deserve a spot on your list. I mean, to me, that's more important than any kind of scores or anything that I can throw in front of them that's predetermined. It's all customized to the person you're sitting across the table from. I'd go to an account and often have like 12 bottles in the car, but I like my 6-bottle bag because I can pull out the wines that I have that are right for this account. And I maybe have more wines in the car, but these are the wines that are tailored for who I'm sitting across the table from. And you get a really good hit rate when you do that, because the more effort you put into really presenting to the buyer as a person, as opposed to these are the wines that I have to show you. And here's a generic coverall that catches, whatever concerns you might hypothetically have. It just doesn't connect as much as sitting there trying to figure out what problems that they have currently and how your product can solve those problems. But that's an individual thing, and it's a rapport that's built over many visits and learning about the account, working with the account, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and then following up on that. So yeah, it's there's no shortcut to it really.
I want to know, what are the right questions, right? You're cold calling, you went into a restaurant, and then you just want to ask 3 or 4 right questions, like throw me some right questions that can give us a good information about that restaurant, for the wine program.
Well, first of all, I'll just look at the list. And, the list is an explanation of kind of what people value and what people find is important for their restaurant and what types of wines they want to feature. If you're in Napa and it's all Napa list, I'm not going to bring Barolo to them. If you're in Sonoma, I maybe not bring as much Napa stuff. It really depends on, the concept of the program. So, start to chat with the buyer and just see kind of where they are, what wines they're excited about, what their background is, where they worked before, and maybe you have some common ground. To me, it's more about building that relationship and seeing whether this is someone that's going to be responsive to conversations, interaction, or whether it's somebody who's just like, got to get the job done, got to fill this slot, and, something that sells that I don't need to worry about. There are different types of buyers. There's buyers that are total geeks that are into it, that you can get excited about something. And then there's guys that are like really busy assistant managers who just want to have wine going out the door. And so, you got to tailor your approach to whatever that is. So it really depends on the person. You have to spend the time and do your research. And a lot of stuff you could do, like sitting at the bar, looking at the back bar. If you see all kinds of weird spirits and interesting cocktail program, that, hey, these guys are creative. They're doing something, they take pride in what their beverage program is. If you see standard stuff, then you're like, okay, this is probably not going to be an adventurous buyer. And you get those clues. You can pick them up just walking into the restaurant, looking around before you, or even online before you go into the restaurant. Those are things that you just got to open your eyes. And I think being a somm and having that restaurant experience helps you to tune into those fine-tuned things. You notice things about a restaurant intuitively because you're programmed to notice that stuff. So it helps to speed up that interaction.
Thanks, Scott. Mark, just a couple of questions, different. A lot of a lot of brands we see hiring sommeliers to knock doors and plan their restaurant strategy. How much of that is a good thing? Like leading up to what Scott just said, like is it good to hire some actual sommelier to, talk to sommeliers and focus on selling. One. Second is on the cold calling, right? We all have a lot of trouble finding who the buyer is and when can you meet. Like, we just don't know when I can meet Allison because she's never there, for example. And you know what I mean? So what is a good way to get that first meeting? And the first question was, how much of you think will be ROI positive if someone just hired a sommelier for selling to a sommelier?
I think the sommelier to sommelier relationship is something valuable. And it's interesting what Scott was just saying about seeing the mind behind the list. If you have an interest and a background in wine, you can look at what someone's doing on a list and you can tell whether it's boilerplate, traditional, whether it's a more steakhouse approach, or whether it's something more eclectic, more interesting, where you're going to have more of an in terms of your more interesting offerings that you have.
As far as cold calling, like how can we find data information apart from obviously networking and going and going and buying a wine and creating a rapport, but any other sales sort of processes which you find can be scaled for cold calling in restaurants?
A lot of the work that I do is very local, and I think having been part of the Chicago fine dining scene for about 20 years, it's almost inevitable. If I don't know somebody, I know them through somebody. And that's something you need to be careful of in terms of, you think, oh, this is my friend. No problem. I can move this $60 bottle of wine to them because we hang out. Well, that's not cool. Like, if you have an entree to someone, that's wonderful. You've worked together, friend of a friend, similar interest in terms of wine, but if they're not interested, if they already have a Canon Fransac that they're happy with at that price point, then you've got to slow your roll. You've got to pull it back, and that for me is more of a challenge. I really know most of the folks who are buying wine, not everyone for sure, but I have been lucky enough to work in a number of establishments. So there's a pretty broad network of folks that I'm in touch with.
So I guess networking, relationships, referral is a good way, you're saying. I think, I'm trying to find some way where we can talk fast so everyone can speak more. Appreciate your patience there, and I do understand. Let's do a little power round approach, right? So I'm going to ask a quick question. Everyone can just pick, fast answers. I'm going to ask, what are the three categories / wines that you would be adding in 2024 in the first quarter, so we know that's what overall, not just your own restaurant, but overall, what's your pick for where the growth is, and what's your pick of less sales that you are eliminating? For someone to come in, someone has to go out, right? So pick your three and pick your three out, right? So let's start. I guess Morgan, you want to start a quick one, and then we can just go fast on this.
Sure, I'll start. We're going to be focusing on Sicilian wines. My program's 70% Italian, and so I'm going to speak on the Italian one. Focusing on Sicilian, we're focusing on this is personally, we're going to broaden a little bit more into recognizable California, and that's just from we have a very specific kind of deep Sicilian or deep Italian list, and so both we're going to get nerdier and we're also going to get more approachable at the same time. For the Las Vegas Las Vegas man is everyman that's coming, and so we need something for everyman drinkers as well. And we are moving away from Pinot Noir selections. Personally,
interesting.
We find that they're not selling quite as much as we expected.
On the way in, Loire Valley white, in particular Sancerre, we just can't sell enough of it. Other Burgundy, Chassagne Puligny and Meursault for whites it's dead. They're too expensive. Village Puligny is $100 a bottle. So Saint Romain, Saint Aubin, Santenay, the Macanet wines are all definitely in. And then for reds, I mean, we still see a lot of Pinot Noir, but we are a more fish-focused restaurant. So New Wave Cali, Santa Cruz, sort of things outside of the North Coast. On the way out, rosé is dead. It's just deader than a doornail. We haven't sold a bottle of rosé for months. So I would not load up on that. And then otherwise, really expensive Cali Cab. Just nobody's buying it.
Sure. Alex, you want to pick your three that you guys are adding, or overall, that you would pick in the US to be growing, and then three less.
Yeah, for us, California Cabernet, Napa prices just keep going up with every single vintage. So we're really looking at Cabernets that are kind of like on the outskirts, like the Santa Cruz Mountains or Sonoma Coast, or even up in as far as like Lake County. They're really hitting it off right now. Loire Valley Whites, yeah, we can't sell enough sauce there. It's really a massive trend that's going on right now. Champagne is really growing, and people are really starting to look outside the big major brands. So that's a great place for growth right now.
And which is literally like a no brainer. Don't even come.
I mean, I'd like to say, with a steakhouse program, we can literally buy anything and sell whatever we want. So it's a great luxury to have. I wouldn't say there's not much that's an absolute no.
Rosé, what's your take on rosé, as Morgan said?
No, we do sell quite a bit of rosé, interesting enough. I would say I wish we sold more German and Austrian whites. I really wish we did, and we try our hardest, but they just don't move as well as they should.
Scott, what are you seeing? What's your three picks? That will grow.
I agree. As far as Sicily, it's red hot, especially the volcano there. It's I try to tap the brakes on it because it's like I love the wines and I don't want them to get to go crazy price wise, but that's kind of that train is rolling and it's hard to stop. So yeah, Sicily is great. To me, domestic Rhones and Rhone varieties in general are pretty good to kind of take the place that the Cabernet is pricing itself out of. I find that like for steaks and things, Grenache and Syrah are really great alternatives to Napa Cabernet for that. And I live in Napa, but we got to do all these things. What else is going up? To me, it's like anything.
Where does Australia stand? No one's talking about Australia, or is it that bad? Or how is Australia or New Zealand really or Chile, Argentina?
Yeah, Southern Hemisphere is just not terribly interesting to me, except for maybe South Africa is kind of having a moment. I think there's some really cool wines from there, but the rest of the Southern Hemisphere, I really don't care about South America much at all. Australia, there's really cool stuff, but gosh, you can put it on your list and just admire it. But unless you're really going to beat people over the head with it, people are just, unless it's Penfolds or, you're really going to fight that fight, it's an uphill battle. So yeah, those are wines that I wish did better because, that perception of Australia being those late 90s, early 2000s Parker
the value player,
were just massive and extracted. There's so much more cool stuff down there than just that, but just can't get people to listen to you on those. So yeah, I would say that's in decline. I do agree that rosé is kind of fading. It's always going to be a by the glass staple. I think a lot of wines go through this cycle.
I'll clarify that we still sell plenty of by the glass rosé. The bottleless rosé sales are just dead.
Yeah, it's like Gruner. It had a moment and now it's settled down into a higher level. I think rosé is doing the same thing, where it went from non-existent to everywhere to like settling down into a normal place. And I see rosé doing that for sure.
Armoni, maybe everyone can chip in as well. I guess we all are seeing non-alcoholic thing. How much of this is becoming a permanent thing in your menus? Like, are you really adding that nice and well non-alcoholic beverages?
Absolutely. That's a part of the food story as well. You can take it more complex and do cocktails that you create yourself within your beverage program and with your bartenders. But it's very important to have non-alcoholic wine and sparkling and things that appeal to people who are celebrating. And there's always room for that. On top of that, people feel very included and special if you take the time out to understand your guests and appeal to them. There's several wine companies that are coming out that are a little bit more higher price points, but they can appeal to the food very well. As far as like the wine kind of fizzling out in the Southern Hemisphere with Australia. Australia has a lot of cool non-alcoholic projects that they do with just fermenting herbs and shrubs, and then you can pair that with food, and you can link up with your chef and create a really cool non-alcoholic program. I think it's necessary, to be honest.
Alison, I think you would be one great example when sort of a chain or like when Target adds let's say, or Total Wine is adding a whole shelf, right? Like in your case, what's going on there? Let's say at a chain level.
Yeah, so we work quite a bit with zero proof and non-alcoholic selections on our cocktail menus. It's a huge push within our company. And so supporting non-alcoholic wines, we really enjoy. There's the de-alcoholization process really is, we're looking mostly towards German and Austrian wines as far as like the trendsetters and people that are doing it really well. I'd love to see more people doing it well in the US, and it's hitting off so much that actually being able to keep it in stock has been a little bit of a difficulty in Chicago specifically. But I would say that we're also working quite a bit with not necessarily the Lyres and the Sipsmiths of the world, the cocktail or the fake cocktail products, but maybe they're canned, pre-prepared products that we can then have available for just opening can, putting it over ice, putting a nice garnish on it, like adding a little bit more of a juice and a puree and making it into a really lovely cocktail that we can support and also keep it almost as the same price as the rest of our cocktail menu, but having zero proof or zero alcohol. We do also, I want to widen that to like luxury or the luxury tier of tonics and of specialty sodas that I think overlap into the NA sphere, and having, again, national availability for those, being able to speak to those products that really, really drink well right on their own that we can also offer. We really like to work with those.
Mark, just one more different question, and then everyone can just quickly say that as well. What is that one support program that a supplier can offer you apart from everything? Like that one thing, I'll come Friday and Saturday, do a tasting, or I'll come with my winemaker. Give me one thing that you think always works if a brand pitched it, or for you personally at least. And everyone can just answer that, because this will add value on sort of how can they help you deplete, more.
I'm actually going to jump back to the question you asked previously, just quickly.
Sure.
I completely agree. The non-alcoholic category, you've got to have it. I mean, the last two lists that I ran, there was not a non-alcoholic wine category. But I mean, as far back as when I worked at Charlie Trotter's, I mean, we had Gewürztraminer and Pinot Noir juice available for folks who didn't drink. I mean, we were kind of on the cutting edge at that point, as so much so that there was a front page article in the New York Times food section touting our non-alcoholic pairing, which did not exist and had to be put into existence in about 24 hours. But luckily, that was not something I was tasked with. But yeah, the NA category is huge. I think also lower ABV wines, and I think that may be a good boost for the German and Austrian category, because those do tend to have a relatively lower alcohol by volume. In terms of the other question you were asking, in terms of support, I think if you're going to do the swag, do the extras, to try to entice beyond price and sort of reliability, it's got to be quality. If you're positioning yourself as a luxury brand, you need to. If you're giving away wine openers, they need to open wine nicely. If you're giving away check presenters, they need to be well made. They need to be good looking. I mean, that's something I'm proud of for our brand, Vignoble Sullivan. We have these wonderful check presenters that we have as giveaways. It's got all the brands listed on them in gold. It's got a little pocket. I mean, it's almost like a handbag. And something like that says, we are serious about this object, and that becomes a proxy for we're serious about every step of our winemaking.
Alex, what is that one or two support programs that you would highly recommend suppliers in the setups like yourself, like little fine dine restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, understanding that we're all crazy busy. Most of us are running around from the time we get through the door till the time we leave. It's just the way restaurants go. Just do your homework. That was already touched on. Don't bring me 40 wines. Bring me like 3 to 5. And, you don't have to always wait for me to answer my email or set up a time. Pick a weekday at like 2 or 3 p.m. that I'm likely to be there, and just show up with 3 wines. Hey, Alex, how's it going? I know you're really busy, but I really looked at your list. I think these wines really fit. Can you give them a shot? If you don't got time to taste with me now, I'll leave the samples with you. You know, if they're expensive, sure, I'll pour them. If not, just give me the wine and just do that routinely. That's great because honestly, I don't want to spend an hour or two rifling through my emails every day either. I'm too busy for that. So there's nothing wrong with just showing up. Just don't show up with 40 wines and expect me to sit down for an hour. That's a great question. A lot of it's up to the guest, but again, being present, having samples is always great. Keep me and your wines in the front of your mind because especially on a massive Grand Award list, a lot of it gets lost and some bottles collect dust for years. You know, just keep the wines at the front of my mind, keep giving me samples and just show up and I'll think of you.
Understood. Morgan?
Yeah, I really hate this game. I do not have time to play it, right? I just don't. This like, oh, we'll come and swipe $800 on a credit card. Like, I don't want your swag. I don't want your shit. None of it is nice enough, right? In my space, it's infuriating. How about you just make a product that makes sense for me to buy at the price that you're going to charge for it? But the second I hear, well, it's $24 frontline, but we have $12 in support per case, my brain explodes, right? I'm like, well, then why don't you just charge $12 for it, right? I understand there's pricing strategies, but I just don't have time to play this game with distributors around that. And I don't want your branded swag sitting around my very carefully curated restaurant, right? It's just flabbergasting to me. And so almost it's a disincentive to work with you if we have to have this conversation. Because you know what all the wines that I like to buy have? They just show up. How about you just come to my restaurant and spend money, and then I'll think about doing business with you, right? I would like you to not only want to deplete your wines, but I would like you to want to like increase my sales. And if I see you make an investment in that, then we can talk about what's happening. But I do not want it with provisos. I do not want it with quid pro quos. I do not want it in a boat. I do not want it with a rat. You know, like it's just I work with almost 80 vendors. I do not have time to manage each of you in these specific support initiatives, right? Because my prerogative is getting the best product on the table for my guests at all time. And that means shopping the market widely to make sure that's the case. So either you can sell me the wine for what you can sell it to me for, and that makes sense for me, or you don't. But I do not have time to make sure that your brand manager comes in once a week to swipe a credit card for $1. It fucks up all my accounting, right? Like, now I'm not really making, like, I'm just now it's just
we hear you, Morgan.
Not for
we
me.
hear you. I think Brand
Can I say
just
one
want to help
thing?
you.
Can I
Yes.
say one thing? I would
Yes.
actually love for the suppliers to set up a better relationship with the staff. If they would come to me with more options where they would want to come in and train and make relationships, that would also help that they actually went over a little bit of like the sales and the quarterly sales and understood some of the products that are not moving and bring it in to help train the staff. I would more like than happy, even on a busy day during a pre-shift, bring any of them in at all times. It
Right.
works. And if you want to sell that product, it will help me interested in buying other products if you like care about how I'm going to sell it in the long run.
And I would second that and say that if you come to do trainings, you have to do category trainings. Do not train me specifically on your product. If my staff don't understand what Scotch is, it doesn't matter that you've told me everything about your Scotch brand.
True.
If they don't understand where it's from, what's going on, it just doesn't matter. So don't miss the forest for the trees. If you offer that, I don't want to just hear about your brand for an hour or an hour and a half that I've given you of them. Or even a pre-shift. Just make sure that you're making sure they understand the category, and then naturally, because of their experience, they will sell more of your product.
Good point. I think, yeah, I can see some nudges there. On, any closing tips that you guys have overall, just a statement of, brands trying to pitch into the restaurants, what can be a good approach, what can be a good pitch, or maybe even an example of a pitch. Share some real meat. That would be great. Scott, maybe you can start on this one.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to get back to that last question real quick. I think that like high quality openers are important and champagne stoppers because there's never enough of them. And I think people develop attachments to them. So if you have like a really cool wine opener that has a brand on it, you're going to like hang on to that. And it's going to remind you every day as you use it. So that's a good thing. Box full of pull tabs, no thank you. But something that's cool, that's good, like a Cartelier or something like that, absolutely worth the extra money. As far as yeah, pitches and stuff like that. I think stuff we touched on before of just like being mindful who you're talking to and don't waste their time. When I was holding court in restaurants, I was pretty available as far as like people come show me wine anytime. I was open to like try something, but don't waste my time. Don't bring me stuff that you're being forced by your manager to show to me this week. If you have that requirement, tell me. You can check the box. I'll back you up. Fine, but don't just bring me stuff that I can use and don't waste my time. I won't waste yours. To me, that's important, is that relationship, that you understand that I have a job to do. I understand you have a job to do. We work together to accomplish both of our goals. And if we mind each other's time and priorities, then we have a great relationship and everybody benefits from it. So that's what I would say.
Please go ahead. Anyone? Maybe I'll name it. Ellison.
So very specific. This is a little bit harder from the supplier side or like a market manager side, but from a distributor perspective, I absolutely abhor when someone brings me the same thing twice. And I'm not talking like a new vintage or a new release, but if you showed me something 2 months ago and you can't remember, I can promise you that I will remember, because I take notes on every single thing. It's on an Excel spreadsheet. I pull it up. I'll control F and say, yep, we tried this 7 weeks ago. I thought this, let's move on.
That's
and
bad. Yeah.
If my notes are better than yours, shame on you. Bring something else. That's my biggest pet peeve. It's a huge waste of time. So know what you're selling, know how many times that you brought it, that you've had this in the bag and that we've talked about it. It's harder for market managers. They don't always know that, this Pinot Grigio showed up 2 weeks ago and now that they're doing a push for it. That I have a little bit more grace for, because they're talking specifically about their products. But yeah, being organized, I think, is really important.
Mark?
Well, I think in terms of sales, you're building relationships. And my friend's grandfather used to say, "Don't kid a kidder." And I appreciate what Morgan was saying. If you're in a Michelin 3-star, you don't want a bunch of branded pens and tat hanging around. That's sort of more for the mid-tier level places where you'll maybe appreciate a few extra pens. But I mean, what you're doing is relationship building, and I think a lot of the reason that you buy from people is that you've bought stuff from them in the past that was of great quality and it's sold. And it's it also involves sort of the soft skills, reliability. Do they come and train your staff? If your shipment doesn't show up, will they drive it from the place in the suburbs and drop it off before service? I mean, that stuff goes a long way. And I think those relationships are pleasurable. I mean, when I was buying wine, there are people I absolutely looked forward to seeing, because they knew my palate, they knew what we were trying to do with that specific restaurant in terms of the list, and it was a real ongoing, growing relationship. I mean, it's actually a really nice thing.
Alex, just if I was selling, I did sell wine a lot. So for example, I would make a sommelier's name, a list, and then I would write a little bit about what you like, what kind of movies or books or coffee or whatever it is. But I would have a little bio about understanding you better, right? Like, any tips there on how people can sort of what kind of things is good for relationship building?
Yeah, I think just pay attention to the person, pay attention to the restaurant concept, and just show up once in a while. That's my biggest thing.
Meaning without an intention to sell, just show up saying hello.
You can just do that, yeah. Like, understand we don't have a lot of time, but just seeing your face counts for a lot. Like, I still work with vendors who I've been buying wine from now for almost 2 years, and I don't know what they look like. Like, there still are 3 or 4 that I'm like, who is this? And one of them came in to dine the other day, and he was like, "Hi, I'm Matt from Boston Wine Co." I was kind of like, "Oh, that's what you look like. Damn." But I don't buy a lot of wine from him, unfortunately. But I buy a lot more if I knew what you look like. Come by every now and again, and bring stuff. We all love just wine kicking around, so give us some samples, and that makes us happy.
Any other closing remarks, Armoni? You have any things that you want to share with the suppliers?
I just want to say that there's only really two things that get you in the door with me. A detailed email saying that you looked over my wine list and you saw this gap and this gap, and you're going to bring me 3 or 4 things. And then that's really pretty much the only people that I respond to. Or people who already know and we have a reoccurring relationship and they bring me things that they know I like. I really don't like the you know what my favorite movie is. It's a little cheesy to me. We can talk about that later, but like show me how to make money, how we gonna make money together, and then we can talk about that later, and that's cool. We can drink some cool stuff, but that's really the only meetings I take is people who really understand what it is I'm trying to communicate, and they bring me things that can fill that gap. And
nice. So, folks, appreciate. But if you have to go, please. But I have a couple of questions I can ask, and anyone can answer, raise hand and answer, which people are asking. So feel free to check out as well. I don't want to hold. I know that it's a busy time. I'll just go with the question that just popped in from the audience, right? Argentina is the 5th producer. I think we touched base, right? Australia is also a big producer. Argentina wines are highly awarded, and why is not anyone in US stocking much Argentinian wines, and why are they excluded in the wine list?
I'll maybe talk to that because I do have. I mean, Alex, I imagine sells some as well. I mean, in our more casual restaurant, I think they're a great alternative for big, rich, full-bodied red wine, certainly at a value. But we basically only stock the wines from Zuccardi. The Polygonos and Concreto and all that stuff, because aesthetically they're just much better, to not to put it lightly. There's a lot of sameness in the market, and so really having a product that's differentiated in a way like his, which everything's in concrete, there's significantly more freshness and sort of brightness inside of those wines. But I think it's the difficulty that Argentine wines have is basically that there's a lot of the same thing, and you get a little exhausted by that fact. There are things outside of that, but most of what you get shown is it's Malbec, 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 more Malbec, and after the Malbec, some Malbec.
Some unknown regions, upcoming regions, like Lebanese wine, for example, or from Denmark or Poland or, let's say India. How can people approach you if it's completely an upcoming new region? Do you even entertain that?
I can jump in on that. I just came back from a big wine conference in Belgrade, Serbia, and there's a lot of really cool wines there. But I think a lot of these places, as we talked about BTGs, I think the prices on everything are going up. Availability on Sancerre is impossible. There's a lot of things that we need that are not necessarily being serviced by the traditional markets as far as price and availability. So that's an opportunity for some of these really well-made solid wines to pop up and fill those slots. The price points are usually better. The wines are still really good. There's a lot of great stories and new stories to tell from some of these regions that are exciting. So, take advantage of those opportunities where you can't really pour Napa Cab anymore unless you're a very high-end restaurant. So maybe a well-made cab from Lebanon or Serbia or somewhere else can take those slots at that price point, and you'll make your guests happy when they taste the wine. If the BTG, they get a chance to try it, so they're not committing too much. So I would say take advantage of the value play and the novelty play, and those things can help you get in the door.
All right. So on orange wines or amber wines, do you think that it's just a hype, or it is going to grow like the low or no alcohol category, and you'll see more and more sort of, or you think that the hype is over for orange and amber wines?
I'll take it. I think it's still going up, personally. I think it ties into the whole bio, organic, natural wine movement. It just keeps continuing to push higher and higher and higher. And I think as a brand, the sooner you can get on that train, if you haven't already, the better. I walked into a wine bar here in Boston, and I can hardly find a classically made wine that just uses Lut Raisonné, right? Everything is organic or bio or natural or orange or something weird. So it's still exploding, I think. I think it's actually,
I would agree with what Alex is saying, but in the under 40 set, there's not a lot of people Millennials want to drink those wines. I'm not sure that if your prime demo is over 40, that you're really going the right direction there. But I think the familiarity that's been established with the category among people who are between, let's say 21 and 40 these days is going to carry on into their probably into their later drinking habits as well.